Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. This episode is special. It's an enlightening experience, and I'll explain it to you later as we go on, but I have dedicated all of this to a single video that was made by Maxim Kalashnikov very recently, just 2 days ago, I think. But normally I would use him and quote him in some other sources and put him into context, but I was even surprised about what I saw there. It was hard to even convey, but as you saw from the title, they're breaking down now. And I won't gonna lie, this feels strangely good. But first of all, I have to get through this because, well, when we transcribed this, most of the work organizing this in Russian was done by Evit, and then I did all the translation work. All of this was actually hard to do because, as you know, Evita being half Belarusian means that her native language is Russian as well. And wow, she found it difficult to even understand what Kalashnikov was saying because he looked like a man who has drunk a bunch of benzodiazepines by the end of it. And yeah, you'll hear about this because normally I write bullet points with some comments in between other stuff, but here, yeah, I had to script quite a lot of the part that you're about to hear because, oh wow, this brought back the philosopher in me. I actually thought about naming this episode something after Kafka or some existential dread novel, but they are all just a single name, and that would sound silly. So here we have this. Like I wrote in the introduction, this is a true villainous breakdown of a Z bastard who honestly thinks that the West represents everything that's evil in the world, and that only Russia, as I mentioned in the previous episode, being this religious belief in Russia being a divine empire. Well, we can see him not only face the facts that this whole era that he's grown up in is about to end, but also the fact that in his eyes, everything that is good in the world is now losing. And that would be very sad normally, but in this case, oh boy, I actually never felt as good as writing this episode for a long while, in my professional sense, that is. And after we're through with this, I will also like to talk a bit about what I'm doing besides the show right now. But for now, I want to get over the intro parts because, well, Kalashnikov, not being a man of strong will, as it turns out, the self-proclaimed futurologist, he starts with a bunch of cope. But here is how he treats his episodes, because I will skip the early parts, which I'm going to retell you, and why they're wrong and why that's all copium. And then we'll switch over to what he calls the main subject, and you'll hear all about life from Vatnik's perspective, and it is truly both cathartic and as you'll understand later, quite revealing about their mentality. I think that if you would look at various Putin supporters in the Western world, you would face something like this, because if a Vatnik comes to a conclusion that nope, Russia will not achieve its goals, oh boy, then it gets really, really horrific for them. But let me start with the intro. Maxim Kalashnikov greets his audience like this: I warmly welcome you, my friends. Well, by his friends, he really means other Vatniks who watch his show. But he intros himself as, well, while I'm away on a short business trip, it's time to reflect on what's going on. What does the enemy have in store for us? I mean, of course, not Kiev, but the main enemy for whom Ukraine is just a tool. Let's touch on a topic that is not so much unexpected as it is relevant. But here he starts talking about these mobilization efforts of Ukraine, and quotes some Ukrainians who are complaining about their country's mobilization practices. And these practices are quite rough, yes. But then again, they are the defending side with only about half the population of Russia. Ukraine is forced to be rough and run around mobilizing people because they have no other choice. And of course, there will always be people complaining and such, but, nobody likes mobilization. However, most of Ukraine does understand that this is a necessary evil, but Kalashnikov, due to the fact that he reads materials only from very specific sources, presents this as a huge wave of sympathy. Because, well, he really doesn't read much now, does he? And, well, this is a necessary evil for Ukraine because, after all, we've seen throughout this war in Donetsk and Luhansk and other occupied territories that over there, healthy young men have just ceased to exist as a social group at all. And, well, those who don't like getting mobilized in Ukraine, where they get training and equipment and where most officers genuinely care about preserving their lives, well, they obviously would enjoy it even less if Russia would take over. They'd still get mobilized and use as cannon fodder and meat assaults for whichever conflict would happen next over there, because Russia just takes the populations and uses them that way. And the complaints that Kalashnikov quotes, which he bases his huge waves on, which also might be used by other vatniks, so I just want to explain this a bit. Well, they come from an older generation of officers who haven't really moved away from Soviet mentality and resist NATO-style tactics because they require initiative and independent thinking on all levels in the chain of command. And that's something that they view as unacceptable and, well, wrong. So, as Ukraine actually wants to win this situation, and by win here they mean just, survive as a country, and, well, they replace them. And the thought that if Ukraine would fight the same way as Russia does, but with just less manpower and equipment, then, well, the fact that they would have absolutely no chance of successfully defending against Russia either apparently hasn't popped in the heads of these officers, ex-officers, or has been overshadowed by their hurt personal feelings and pride. Yeah, I also believe pride is an awful thing here, as we'll see later. But, as Ukraine, unlike Russia, doesn't put people in prison for just dissenting opinions, they get to voice them now and then on TV, because they also are not pro-Russian, they just are very much misguided. And Kalashnikov, as many others who like to quote the same arguments, completely ignores that Russia is literally doing the same thing, and since they started the war, they don't need to defend their own homes or anything like that. So, that's a bit silly. But then again, Kalashnikov also has never spoken about the crimes of the returning veterans, which they commit on a daily basis. He only mentions any of this if it's related to Central Asian migrants, really. Which, together with his constant praise of the Nazi military, probably reveals to us a bit more than Max here would like us to know, or admit to himself. But out of all of this part, which I'm skipping here because all this is just very much copium material, I'd like to focus on the one line which really shows the Vatnik attitude. He said at one point over there that the lower classes in Ukraine who are being pushed into this hell, into this inferno, where they don't want to go, will suffer further. Because you see, this is what makes it kind of special to me. Because unlike Solovyov or other paid Kremlin propagandists, Maxim, just as Igor Girkin, who's a good friend of his, is a true believer. And to him, admitting that it's not just the foul Zelensky regime that's against Russia, but rather actual Ukrainian people, well, that would be very discomforting for him and damage his worldview a lot. Which kind of happens, as you'll see later, but even then, he blames Russia for allowing Zelensky's propaganda efforts to thrive, because he believes that it's evil that Zelensky has turned these actually Russians into something Ukrainian, which is unnatural or something. So, it's just sort of silly. Here's a quote from this part, but I really don't want to delve into this too much. Quote, "The enemy understands our indecision and procrastination perfectly well, and is simply exploiting it. A month and a half ago, we suffered the humiliating Operation Spiderweb. Strikes were carried out against strategic long-range air bases, part of the nuclear triad. No one in the Russian Federation's position would have tolerated this. A month and a half has passed, and the SBU, the organizer of the operation, its system and the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine, are still standing still. No one has disturbed them." Yeah, well, once again, I told you nothing would happen, and nothing actually happened. But this whole thing touches a very deep and painful subject for Maxim Kalashnikov. The fact, as he calls them, centers of where decisions are being made, the fact that these places have not been bombed, in Russian that's Center Принятия решений, the fact that this not have been bombed baffles Maxim thoroughly. And he just, refuses to admit that if Russia could bomb them, it absolutely would. But that's a common illusion among vatniks, which is one of the hardest they have to break down. Because it's much easier to blame Russia's inability to achieve their goals solely on the incompetence of officers and the corruption of the system. Because again, this is why the last episode was needed, since you have to look at this from this religious angle, because they can't admit that what they consider a part of actual Godhead and true divinity, for them admitting that this country could not be able to do something, well, that goes against their very essence. And this leads, of course, to some horrible decisions, because they always stay one step away from admitting that what everyone else knows in my region, and that should be clear to you as well if you listen to this show at least for a couple of episodes. The fact that institutional rot does not exist in a vacuum. A situation which is as horrible as vatniks themselves constantly describe and complain about would have never been allowed to happen if, in the first place, if the top levels of the military leadership would not be in on the whole thing. If there would be like a police force that actually investigates crimes instead of beating up protesters, if there would be a functional court system, things simply can't get this bad if there would be at least some people out there who genuinely care and who would be allowed to do their job. Well, that is Elvira Nabiullina, but she's not really allowed to do her job, and she's in massive psychological pain, but that's the only one that I can name. What we have now is the result of many, many years of Putin destroying Russia as a functional country, making corruption systemic and entrenched. Vatniks admit the problems Russia has, but it scares them to think that it's rotten to such a degree. After all, that's also not only hurting their divinity, but that's also what they consider to be a literal antichrist Navalny himself and his supporters used to say. And if they turn out to be right about this, well, what if they're right about other things? Yeah, this is pretty much a are we the baddies moment? And this realization is starting to appear among the Z crowd. And this combined with the Russian cultural taboo on admitting mistakes, because, you can't admit mistakes because then the boss will yell at you. It's this thing where you just avoid responsibility at all costs. So it's very culturally unacceptable to do that. And this scares them and makes them feel extremely uncomfortable. But on with Max, as the rest of this is why I chose to cover what he said in full. It shows Vatnik train of thought, really, and how they make perfectly rational conclusions starting from weird beliefs, which shows you how some belief in weird conspiracy or falsehood can lead to a very, very skewed worldview. Because Maxim, again, honestly, sincerely thinks that Russia are the good guys. It is literally everyone else who is under the thumb of the foul Anglo-Saxon devils. And again, he genuinely believes this, and so coming to accept the inevitability of something he considers truly dark and horrible is, well, fascinating. And what is exactly this dark and horrible thing that he now fears so much that he says it's inevitable? Well, my dear listeners, the same thing I've been talking about for many years now, even before the war started. The collapse of Russia. The final end of this, what he considers to be divine empire. I find this fascinating, really, which is why I'm actually written this introduction to you, as this is a tragedy from a villain's point of view that shows both his weird worldview, which he shares with other vatniks, including how they actually see you, dear listeners. Because here he will talk about the sinister plots of the United States masters, their European cohorts, and the like. And, of course, their sinister plans about whom he is completely sure of, as he believes in the stupid conspiracy theory that it was the CIA saboteurs who destroyed the Soviet Union, as he's genuinely convinced that it was the best country of all time. This is a prime example of why it's dangerous to refuse to admit your own flaws, as vatniks rather will look for foul conspiracies and evil secret organizations that run the world in darkness, but they won't admit that their system was broken and the end result was pretty much just a matter of time. And it's easier to be super nostalgic and praise the Soviet Union if you're a Russian, because for Russians it was more of an economical issue. They did not experience the Russification and extermination of cultures and peoples like the rest of us did. So for them it meant something else, but the vatniks have gone way too far. And you can see that it all stems from there. It all really stems from the fact that, the Vatniks have started as a whole thing because they truly believed that all of this somehow, of the collapse and everything, that it was the American fault. And in a way, I suppose they blame us in the Baltics as well, since they can't stand the Baltic way and our independence movement. This is just so weird. I'm giving you this explanation because I'd like you to pay attention instead of laughing about the conspiracy theories. You can truly learn a lot about the future of Russia and what's about to happen here. And this text includes a lot of what I have been telling you about, except, of course, coming from a honest-to-God Vatnik's perspective and not mine. The worst part for Vatniks here is, by the way, the fact that they misunderstand the initial causes of all of this, which is the collapse of the Soviet Union, and so even the few solutions that they still cling to desperately to, they'll never work. And, I also think that this text is a very solid argument for my view that Russia's collapse at this point has, basically become inevitable because the people who dedicate their lives to saving it, they have also decided that it's time to focus on the things that they know. And we can tell that if these guys with the best plan of keeping Russia together don't have one, and no one else cares about keeping Russia together, because again, for Putin, if he loses power, then Russia, whatever, doesn't matter what happens with Russia. But these guys care, and what they offer will never work. So this is just interesting. Also, as you know, I have dealt previously on the show with material that has made me feel really sad and that was hard to cover and caused anger and great distress. And it's a bit cathartic to finally see the people who've done so much evil, with a zealous conviction about their own correctness no less, and who have made me go through a lot of hell personally. They finally start to break down themselves. Call me cynical, I can even agree with you at this point, but I consider this to be an episode that's there for two reasons. First of all, the valuable insight that I truly think it can give, and as I have listened to your criticism, I also hope that my comments here, which are quite long, properly explain why I consider this to be a valuable thing and how to approach this, and what you're about to hear to be able to get the most out of it from this, because otherwise, you can just laugh about the conspiracy theories, or you can use what you've learned on the show to get a better understanding. And secondly, because if you have been listening to this show for any prolonged period of time, if you have been following the news about the war, if you follow geopolitics in general, especially if you live in the United States and have to deal with Trump's antics, then I think this should give you some hope. Some hope that if Vatniks are starting to make content like this one, especially true believers and self-proclaimed intellectuals like Maxim here, then the world has finally, maybe, started to move in the direction of normalcy again. That maybe the very darkest hour has passed, that although we are still deep underwater, we have maybe finally stopped sinking deeper, and at least have maybe started to move upwards again, at least when it comes to the war in Ukraine. This is a very hopeful episode, in my opinion. And also I was waiting for this to happen because, if things were going as I had predicted they would, which I have spoken about on this show for so many times, then it just had to at one point. This had to happen, and this was on my list, which would show that I'm on the right track. Same with the things I mentioned last episode about the lowering of the payments for new recruits and all that stuff. So this has finally happened, and it makes me feel slightly better about myself. I hope that after you listen to this, you'll also feel better. For one, I discovered that Kafka's experiences actually are pretty funny and heartwarming when, genuinely evil people are the ones who live through them. With all that said, now I will allow Maxim Kalashnikov to speak for himself. Maybe with some unscripted comment of mine in between, somewhere over there. But I don't want to disturb this moment of, I would say, existential awareness. This is kind of like, again, I mentioned, what if are we the baddies thing from the famous meme that everyone knows. Except that for these guys, they can't even ask that question, to be honest. They truly believe that they are good, and, oh boy, I really think you will enjoy this. Quote, "Let's move on to the main topic. What is the enemy preparing for us? I can tell you in advance. Our main enemy is the masters of the United States." not Kiev, but those who are directing this war. They are preparing a strategic defeat for us, but one that is controlled in the form of economic turmoil in the rear and the general crisis which should result in a controlled change of power. We already can see the points of bankruptcy happening. Take Iran, for example. It recently signed an agreement with China to purchase modern air defense missile systems and fighter jets. They have decided to abandon our aircraft and purchase Chinese J-10C fighter jets, which they believe have proven themselves in the real warfare. They recently took part in air clashes between Pakistan and India. India had French Rafales while Pakistan had J-10Cs. The ratio of losses was not in India's favor. And now the Indians also want these Chinese fighters. Iranians. It's understandable. We got bogged down in the war in Ukraine, which we didn't want to drag out. We thought we'd be out in 3 days, but we got stuck and were unable to help Iran. And now China is taking our place as Iran's main strategic partner. Well, this is one for our failures. One of the points of bankruptcy in our foreign policy. The South Caucasus, Transnistria, the looming NATO, and the loss of Syria, and so on and so forth. All these are signs of a failed policy. Well, they have to move on to domestic political failures. Of course, this plan must be broken, but I'm just stating what I see, the actions on the part of our enemies. Now, if you listen to our propaganda, huge hopes are being pinned on the so-called summer offensive, which is supposed to finish off Ukraine, the Ukrainian armed forces, and the Ukrainian leadership. But half of the summer has already passed. Although there are now many cheerful reports that we are supposedly advancing very well on all fronts. But advancing on all fronts means not advancing anywhere. It is clear now that we will never enter Zaporozhye. But as you understand, the enemy is counting on us not having solved the problems of this death zone created by Ukrainian drones. Well, of course we have more drones. But drones in defense and drones in attack are two different things. Drones in defense are somehow more effective, as it turns out. We have no countermeasures against these Ukrainian armed forces defensive drones. And the enemy is counting on us to run out of steam in this offensive, to be drenched in blood, to suffer huge losses. I don't want to mention certain things, because I am also in touch with our guys, my friends there. Our losses are very, very heavy, because they are still pushing forward, always being pushed forward. They need big reports, the officers do, and the enemy is counting on our offensive to stall because of these huge losses. That means we will move very, very slowly. And in our rear, the economical crisis will develop much faster, which will naturally spill over into the social and political spheres. That is their plan. And can you imagine the severity of these ground battles when people are literally storming on foot, when they don't have enough supplies and have to scavenge because their own state doesn't provide for them? And here I have to interlude. He shows a video here as a proof, which was posted on the Telegram channel of two majors, also quoted everywhere. Before the video, he just finalizes with, the video speaks for itself. You'll understand everything. Look at the screen. And, well, here I'm just gonna, translate what the two majors said in this video. Quote, "On behalf of the assault unit of the 33rd Regiment, I would like to ask the readers of the Telegram channel, two majors, for the help in purchasing communication equipment for our unit. Communication equipment is one of the most important things during combat. After all, when in contact, a soldier can not only request air support and report on the enemy, but also request medicine, food, and ammunition to continue fighting. By staying in touch with their command, soldiers also receive updates on their movements and information about the enemy's location, as well as information about the location of shelters they can take up. Our support is very much needed right now, as our troops are liberating more and more territory occupied by the enemy. Your help is an invaluable contribution to our common victory. Together we are strong. Only with your help the enemy can be defeated." This is how we see the strategic weakness of the Russian Federation leadership in terms of unmanned aerial vehicles and drones. This is a monstrous delay, monstrous procrastination in making the necessary decisions. They don't understand that the enemy has long had unmanned systems in addition to drones in their line units. We do not have them. This is causing us enormous damage. It is horribly crippling our units. This is the main reason why our army is just melting away. End of the two majors video with comment. And two majors have always been super optimistic here, and this is just me interluding here. But this is different. Maxim Kalashnikov continues. My friends who are artillerymen also write to me from time to time, saying, Maxim, do you understand how skillfully they use those drones? They know perfectly well that our large caliber artillery has a huge problem with spare barrels. One of their drones is used against stout heavy guns and self-propelled guns. If there's a Mongol, they'll shoot it down. The next drone with a cumulative charge in its barrel strikes our artillery. They destroy the infantry, burn them in their armored vehicles, 20, 30, sometimes 40, 50 kilometers from the front line. This is insane. Now, even the enemy admits that it's allowing our forces to advance, thanks to the Air Force, which is using precision-guided bombs to disrupt and destroy defenses on the front line. And if weapons appear that can destroy the carriers of guided aerial bombs, the front line could come to a complete standstill. If Trump, who started the game of forcing peace on only Kiev and us, suddenly provides such weapons, then things will be just ultimately disastrous. By the way, those are the very hopes placed on Trump. That Trump will come, help us rein in Zelensky, stop helping Kiev, and we will win. They are also an indicator of this weakness, which the enemy will now use in its attempt to inflict a strategic defeat on us. That is, not to do it ourselves, not to knock out the center of decision-making and paralyze their whole system, but to let Trump do everything for us. Well, you see, Trump has turned around like a steamroller and is now rolling forward towards us. There is no need to go into details, everyone already knows them. This is another one of our vulnerabilities. Now, let's move to the enemy's plan, which is completely obvious to me as a futurologist and a historian. Here I'd like to interlude the fact that futurologist probably offends John Michael Gautier more, because he's an actual one who studies about these possibilities from a very deeply academic perspective. But the fact that Maxim Kalashnikov also calls himself a historian, I take personal offense to that, just in addition. But, well, let us now focus on the fact of what he really considers completely obvious. A true believer indeed. Ahem. The masters of America, who believe that we have already fulfilled our mission in their interests, are, so to speak, moving on to the next stage. A controlled change of power or political regime change in the Russian Federation. According to their plan, several such streams of crises must come together. The first stream is the exhaustion and stagnation of our summer offensive, heavy losses when we fail to pull Kiev out of the war and the resulting heavy casualties. The second stream is the rapidly developing economic crisis in our rear, with the shutdown of enterprises, devaluation, skyrocketing prices, inflation, problems with our bank deposits, budget problems, huge deficit, and so on and so forth. These also merge with the military circumstances. When we lose our economic base, when our economy collapses, we lose the ability to actually wage war. And finally, the third stream is the 2026 elections. These are parliamentary elections. Elections are always point of potential instability when everything can break out. A side note from me, yeah, it's always the case in Russia, which is why I also put the very date of these elections and what could happen after them as one of the points of instability. Putin's sort of elections was the previous one, but this is the moment where the situation is much, much more different, which is why I think that this whole mess will be over in the way Kalashnikov dreads by this very point. But carrying on. These three streams must converge into one, that is, focus in a parallax. Whatever he means by that. Parallax is an astronomy term, and you use 2 points, but you know, we never agreed that Kalashnikov is a good futurologist or something. This may be compounded by problems with migrants. God forbid there could be some kind of man-made disaster or some new operation of web. We see the Chechen problem growing, events related to the name of Adam Kadyrov. This is a very powerful destabilizing factor. All this is working towards this parallax, which according to the plan of our enemy, which is practically obvious to me, should happen after all these troubles, after the convergence of crises, namely controlled change of power. That is always what I also say, that it's going to start with Chechnya. But here he analyzes the plans of the enemy. Our main enemy, the United States, does not want to destroy the Russian Federation at this time, as it understands perfectly well that if the Russian Federation collapses, decolonization and other things will follow. Which is why I consider it must collapse because it's a colonial empire. But, I don't understand Kalashnikov here. But again, he's slowly losing it, so it is what it is. The enormous resources of Siberia and the Far East, all these natural resources in the Bamo and Trans-Siberian regions could fall into the hands of China, which is completely undesirable. No, their interest is completely different. To turn the Russian Federation into a severely undermined, bloodied Russian Federation weakened by an unsuccessful war, into a loyal pro-American satellite and a counterweight to China. Moreover, this Russian Federation, where political power must be changed, must endure a generation of moral and psychological trauma. The Soviet Union, reunification, empire, power. There must simply be a tremor. Everyone must remember the terrible circumstances of this Ukrainian war. In the sense that, God forbid, such a thing would ever happen again, so that the slogan, "We can do it again, we can repeat this," simply triggers a Pavlovian reflex, a shock of electricity. I was there myself. I saw how many Soviet insignia there were on chevrons, helmets, and so on. So this must be eradicated completely, and the dream of the 1990s must be realized. A pocket Russian Federation, a raw materials hinterland, a source of raw materials. Well, it has nuclear weapons and acts as a counterweight to China. Well, I, however, think that his first plan about the collapse is much more realistic, but he dreads that situation way too much. But you can tell that this is in his mind, and he tries to find justification in bizarro conspiracy theories, which make to him obvious that this won't happen. But we're smarter than that here. I can smell their fear, because unlike him, I'm a professional at journalism. But, carrying on with what Kalashnikov says, because his future, without this collapse, well, it doesn't look any brighter, to be honest. The collapse will not happen just because United States do not want it. But our enemy must use this confluence of crises to bring about a controlled change of political regime. Again, wrong premises, sort of logical, but yeah, just a different world that they live in. Truly, they will be handed over. It is clear that according to their plans, they will remove the upper echelons of power, discrediting them. Again, they will be dealt with, so to speak. The enemy is confident that after Prigozhin's mutiny in June 2023, those at the top will be incapable of acting, that there will be a vacuum, that everything will be very fragile. If this crisis begins to rage, there will be a paralysis of will and action. In short, the upper echelons can be sacrificed. The main thing is that the new government has a successful scenario, let's say like February 2017, but a second edition where everything is kept under control. The main goal for such a transformation, such a transition, is to arrive at, and check this out, new Gorbachevism. To a situation where our beau monde, he always uses this French term for the elites because, well, if you use French words, then the rest of the Vikings think that you're smart. Just saying. This beau monde, already a renewed Russian Federation, does everything to make peace with the West, to have sanctions lifted, to open access to foreign assets, to be able to travel freely abroad, but they don't really want to live in United Arab Emirates or China. In this scenario, I think that some of the security forces will have to be turned into scapegoats. Perhaps they should be sent to The Hague to stand trial as war criminals, as the enemy plans, and they should be handed over for exemplary punishment. And I don't think that our beau monde, who literally really misses the reality of 2014 and wants to go back to 2013, will go along with this. So the security forces should be removed from real power somehow so that they don't have too much of it. In short, power should go to the evil pro-Western systemic liberals. However, there is danger on this path. There are always plans. As you remember, there were plans in February 2017 among some Western forces who believed that Nikolai could be removed. Or rather, not even among Western curators, but among our bourgeoisie at the time. So, let's get rid of this Tsar too. A small, victorious, bloodless revolution. But back then, it didn't work out. Things got out of balance, remember? The crisis spiraled out of control. Oh, I deeply apologize. He was meaning about 1917. It's just that I have spent so much time translating this to be as accurate as possible with all the emotions that, he just writes 17 there, and my transcripting software just wrote it as 2017. Here he was talking about the 1917. Sorry, this is the previous part. And I'm recording this nearly at 5 a.m. in the morning after a whole night of work, and I probably don't want to record all of this yet again. So here you go. Here's some real situation here. Sorry about that, but let's continue. I would like to remind you that the United States planned the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. However, that was only the secondary backup goal. United States just wanted to undermine it and make it their junior satellite. But the collapse, well, that was already underway due to the imbalance caused by the internal crises, and facilitated by the actions of their special services. The same danger could arise in this plan for the convergence of the three systems. If this will be implemented, then there will be a struggle between the clans, as if the connecting keystone is disappearing. The top leadership and a struggle for the restitution of power and property will begin. In our country, power and property are always connected, and our enemy understands this perfectly well. The merger of power and property began in the autumn of 1991. It was not capitalism that was created, but a kind of raw materials feudalism. They understand perfectly well that it has now played out, and now the war in Ukraine is, well, beginning, which was, as it were, the final stage of finishing out of the crisis, so to speak. And now it's closing at its end. And yes, when I make these mistakes, they are actually there in the text. I am not inventing them, it's just that at this point, his coherence starts to slowly disappear, which I find horribly interesting and quite nice. But then the redistribution will begin, and the redistribution can indeed turn into a process of disintegration. When they start figuring out who's in charge, who should sit where, all the agreement reached earlier may be broken. Other factors may compound this imbalance between clans. For example, they let in so many migrants, but there is also the factor of a migrant uprising within the country, which is not going anywhere. Aggressive Islamism, which is not Islam, as Kalashnikov notes, Islamism specifically, it still exists. Right now it's converging with growing tensions between Russians, Orthodox Christians, and some very active zealous Islamists. This could also explode when the political system changes as our enemies plan. Even now, some zealous defenders of Islam are unhappy with the monument to the motherland on Malachov Hill. Can you imagine the power of that bomb in principle? And then he plays a video of a Muslim man speaking about how he wants to change it because the monument that was built back then, well, that was basically something that, hurts them a bit. It was a normal text, like some ideology or something, but it was also very hard to understand at this point too. But Kalashnikov continues, "This is an illustration of what other bombs could explode as part of this plan for a controlled change of political regime here. And if our authorities try to carry out an extremely unpopular mobilization against the backdrop of a huge economic turmoil, this will be an additional straw on the camel's back, so to speak, an amplifier of the crisis. Do you now understand what is going on? Many people believe what our propaganda tells all the time, that our country cannot be defeated. Yes, purely by military means, when we mean bombing, strikes deep into the territory, not with drones, but with something more serious, an invasion, a victory parade on the Red Square. This, of course, will not happen. But if you have read my third project, written in collaboration with the late Sergei Kugushev, we introduced the example of meta-warfare, the principles of military art. The main thing is to achieve your goal, to crush your enemy. And how do you do it? With strategic bombing or by exploiting tensions in their rear, their economic collapse. It doesn't really matter at all at the end. The main thing is the end result. And the end result, I think, is obvious, where they are trying to lead us. Well, now let's see. There is a huge difference, thank God, between February 1917 in the Russian Empire and the fateful August and autumn of 1991 in Gorbachev's Soviet Union. If we take the Tsarist era, there were no forces that could come to the head of the state and demand his abdication. At that time, it was done by representatives of the highest political bourgeoisie. There were no Bolsheviks anywhere near. And all the front commanders and in fact, the head of the general staff, General Alexeyev, who was paid with our money, forced Nicholas II to abdicate. Now, they said that it would be desirable for you to leave. And again, the mistakes are there by Kalashnikov this time. Immediately after that, dual power arose. After all, there was a very strong socialist composition movement. It was not only the Bolsheviks and the Cheka who were there, they created a council, a second center of power. There are no such factors now. We do not have such traitors, generals like Alexeyev. We do not have such front commanders, I repeat, thank God. And if we take, for example, the collapse of Gorbachev's regime, then the factors were very terrible and negative, which caused not only a change in the political system, but also the collapse of the country. The first thing that catches the eye is the obvious dual power. If after February 1917 there was a temporary government on the one hand and the Soviet Council on the other, then on the eve of the August 1991 there was dual power in the form of Gorbachev's Union Center, and the second was Russian, the RSFSR headed by Yeltsin. And the RSFSR was the largest republic of the Soviet Union. The main part of the Soviet Union was this RSFSR. Well, 5/7 if I'm not mistaken. That is, a second center of power emerged here, which undermined the Union center of power. Thank God that this is not observed in the Russian Federation today. But, and pay close attention to this because, again, like I said, all of this is what I believe will actually happen because I do not believe in a plan of a controlled regime change as Kalashnikov puts it here, because I believe in a lot of things that he says, which I have been, again, telling you since about, 2018 or something when I first started mentioning this. And yet again, I also have always said that Chechnya will start this. Now, Kalashnikov, a true Vatnik, will tell you the same thing. But there is Chechnya, which lives according to its own peculiar internal laws. But imagine, it is small after all, and there used to be the RSFSR. Plus there were other very strong Union republics headed by local leaders who were also watching, who also had their own ideas, who were already taking power away from the Union center and crossing many issues to themselves. The factor does not exist in the Russian Federation now, but the Chechen factor still remains and is serious. This is not Ukraine in 1981, nor Uzbekistan, nor Azerbaijan, nor the three Baltic states, nor Moldova, but it doesn't make the crisis much easier, although it does reduce its danger somewhat. Nevertheless, there are other dangers to replace those that existed in 1991. In general, a crisis is an unpredictable thing where we cannot foresee everything that might happen, especially when crises intersect, merge, and begin to influence each other. Something that has not yet happened may emerge. What can we draw from this? What are the conclusions? The danger is very real. From autumn 2025, drastic changes in the entire reality will begin. And these crises, this phenomenon, will intensify. What should we as patriots prepare for? Let's try not to summarize this too much. Roughly speaking, we need to be prepared for the fact that the country will need a National Salvation Committee. A true National Salvation Committee that unites all healthy forces of good, as he puts it. And those who can be turned into scapegoats, into victims who need to be bought off, into such scapegoats. Yeah, again, he just said this sentence. A huge responsibility now falls on the middle and lower echelons of the security forces. If everything goes out of control and not the way the cunning foreign conductors wanted to go, if the Russian Federation also cracks and falls apart, then it will be the end. We remember the price of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that's it. That's the end. We will not be able to regroup. It will be over for us as a people. Yeah, I told you, this is that serious. Here he tries to still cope, but not much. The fact that Ukraine will also perish is little consolidation. For me, the Russian Federation, Ukraine, and Belarus are all parts of Greater Russia. And if we overcome this crisis, then maybe we have a chance, after some time with the necessary reforms, to restart the process of integrating these three branches of the Russian people. I would like to remind you that the Russian people, those whom you now call Russians, are great Russians. We only become true Russians in a tripartite unity when the great Russians, little Russians, which are Ukrainians, and white Russians, which are Belarusians, form a single federated state. For those of you who want to know exactly why, for example, this is bullshit, you can go and check out my Substack, which is easy to find. I'm literally called The Eastern Border over there as well. And my recent post was about Belarus, which is just beautiful. But he truly believes this in the Divine Empire sense. And carrying on, where the final segments of this start to happen. This unity is what I had dreamed of. And now, unfortunately, my dream was thrown far back with the start of an ill-conceived, unprepared military operation in Ukraine. This dream was thrown back probably in 2014, when everything could have been done quickly and practically without conflict. But then the very same terrible slowness and indecisiveness in decision-making that we have just been talking about all throughout this war, that came into play. I will continue to try and monitor this issue. The situation is now accelerating and becoming worse every day. We might have another year of solar activity ahead of us. Let us recall Chuzevsky's Earth Echo, his classic work on solar storms. This is when solar activity drives processes in the human world. It is precisely during years of solar activity that the most terrible disasters, epidemics, wars, and revolutions occur. We are now at that very critical point, and it is clear that we cannot abandon this topic. We have to monitor the situation very, very closely and keep in touch with each other. A very dangerous moment is approaching, guys. Everyone must know what they're doing. The motherland is waiting for us to try and fulfill our duty. No one will come to our aid. It's up to us. We must do something about the end. Please try and join the patriotic communities that are spread all over. It is going to be difficult. Until we meet again, dear friends. End quote. So, as you can see, this is not being gloomy or even sarcastic that Girkin said. Here he basically states what he dreads the most and why he thinks this could happen. But again, the problem is that I don't think Trump really cares about this whole situation. And I believe that, yes, things will escalate out of control. And like I said, the furthest date that I gave you a while back ago was 2026 August, right? I feel more confident than ever. Because, so far I have been using his arguments all from different sources when speaking about why I have believed that Russia will collapse, as it just simply has to for a long while already. Why I have been focusing on the ethnic tensions and crime, by the way, which he doesn't focus about that much because, well, of course, as in his head, all these people who will fight in this special military operation, they're all heroes to be praised. Well, he just believes that that crime part is not that serious, but it actually isn't very much. The situation is even worse than what Kalashnikov imagines, and it already causes him to literally tremble in fear and speak barely coherently. I actually made the text a bit more readable than it originally was. So, I bet this is not the last time when I make a look at this on these things like that, on episodes and moments where these Vatniks just collapse and internally struggle with the fact that, well, if you believe that Russia is a divine entity, then it's truly Armageddon for them. I can't really wait for that to happen. And just to add insult to the injury here for Mr. Maxim Kalashnikov, there is always my last segment, which I have picked very carefully this time, since, well, in such an occasion you would think that the Russian government would be doing something at least somehow related to the war, besides writing reports that everything's going smoothly, while the people who have been actively supporting the army, who've been on the front lines and everything, well, they're now not even panicking, facing existential crisis. But meanwhile, the Russian government, well, in contrast to all of this, and to show how much they care, well, Gosduma, and this is from the regional news, Gosduma did not support a ban on advertising magicians and astrologers. Quote, the Russian government has prepared a negative review on a bill that was supposed to ban advertising for fortune tellers, astrologers, esotericists, and other types of magicians and fortune tellers. The initiative was put forward by a large group of State Duma deputies, The bill was submitted to Parliament at the end of April, with the authors citing the need to protect citizens from misinformation, manipulation, and negative influences on their physical and mental health. According to their estimates, Russians spent almost as much money on astrologers and various sorcerers in 2024 as they did on food. Over the course of a year, the market for occult services grew 20-fold. Also, again, I picked this very carefully. And Russian citizens spent 2.4 trillion rubles on visits to these magicians, which is 0.4 trillion more than on food. That is, converting to dollars, that would be that the Russians spent $30,736 million for various astrologers, and at the same time, they only spent $25,617 million in food. This is also one of those points where you can say that it's probably not going all right, especially knowing that fruit prices have been increasing. But apparently this is much more important to them, which is just amazing. And so, because of this situation, which clearly doesn't look good in statistics, these guys plan to ban this advertising for such services. However, as noted in the government's response to this bill, quote, "The wording used in the document does not comply with the principle of legal certainty and will create a risk of arbitrary interpretation and application in practice." And at the same time, government experts emphasized that the rule on fair and honest advertising even applies to dark wizards. Yes, I am not joking. So, as you can see, we have a Russian government that decides not to ban wizardry, even though the Russian people literally spend way more money on that than on food. And we have Kalashnikov. As I said, sometimes you don't even have to do anything yourself. You just have to take their texts, and it reads like some sort of a educational novella or something of that sort. Truly, we live in strange times. But, well, this should at least make you guys feel a bit better. Because the end for that cursed empire that has been Russia, this prison of nations, that is something that we should look for. And, well, prepare. And seriously, because the time of troubles, as Kalashnikov states, well, that awaits us in any way or form, even if some sort of weird new leader emerges that can keep Russia together somehow, which I honestly don't see how that could happen. Because Kalashnikov here thinks too highly, even now, of this Russian liberal opposition, who are not popular, who have no influence, basically, and who are, well, unlike he presumes, not supported by the American government. Which, by the way, Kalashnikov here, in his True Enemy speech, he thinks that they all got funding from the CIA constantly, which they never have, because that's just the conspiracy theory. So if you think about that, this controlled change of regime, it simply cannot happen because there's nothing to change. And Putin, yeah, I've told you that Putin will try to turn the screws together tighter or something, but if you might have noticed, Putin was strangely absent from what Kalashnikov said in both versions of his, even if you presume that his conspiracy-based opinion was somehow correct. Because, and this is what I try to explain to people, Putin has stopped being an actual political actor here. It even doesn't matter anymore what Putin wants, because, well, since, I guess earlier this month, things are now moving that are far outside of his control, which he probably doesn't even understand. I will, of course, be here to document all of this. But I consider this to be one very fundamental episode, because this is the first time when someone speaks about what I've been telling all this time just so openly. Vatniks do not like to speak about this because of their religious ideas, as I said last time about Russia's divinity. To mention this is to cause bad luck. It's the unthinkable, unspeakable. I only drew my conclusions previously from their comments and their indirect words. They always added like otherwise or else. Like they always hint at this, of course, but I can read through the lines. I know what they mean. And the moment when they finally themselves, in open words, even if weird conspiracy backed, but still, when they start talking about this possibility openly and take it extremely seriously, well then those people who have for some reason decided that Russia cannot be defeated, and I've seen them on social media, well, you can probably expect what's gonna happen to their mental state once this thing implodes on itself. Lots to think about, and we live in quite difficult times. That's it for the episode part. And now, at the end of this, I would just like to add that I finally started writing down my gonzo adventures. You know, all these things that I've seen as a journalist, starting with my first job as in the media in this small rural area near the Russian border where the show got its name, Eastern Border. And yeah, I'm going to post this one on Substack. And it was weird because I try to be more measured, but I guess I'm overworked. So my beloved wife Evita said that I need to be a bit more edgier even, which is something that no one has said to me ever before. But it's going to involve a lot of work, and I hope that you'll check it out. I will, of course, record it in audio form for everyone who is a supporter of this show, whether it be on Patreon or a paid Substack subscriber or on Fourth Wall. And if you want to get that and audio versions of everything that I'll put on Substack, then please become our supporter because, well, due to the situations I've been speaking about previously, I can't be here without you. David is getting her master's degree in week and dollar and all this mess, as you know. So I, once again, deeply, deeply thank you for your help. Especially huge thanks goes to Plesano. You know what who you are and everything, and I'm really happy and thankful for you being there as well, because in hard times when you get something positive, then really feels much better. Also, well, we're back on YouTube. I finally found a way what to do there. I'm now uploading stuff with it's just my logo with a short description of the show there for now, because I haven't had the time to actually go out and film things with my FPV drones. But there's going to be more stuff going on there. I sort of realized that it was maybe a mistake not to post there after Acast pulled it down, but I had never really had an experience with this, but I found some help. Haven't hired them, but there are people who are ready to help me out with some things, so you can also listen to this there. It's also just the Eastern Border or Eastern Border podcast. You will find it easily. You'll recognize it by the logo. But yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. A lot of work that I hope that you will enjoy, which might not be related to this war. As to be honest, I'm quite getting, it was quite dark and hard to move on after I had made predictions and I was waiting for this and it was just so far away. But now that a few dominoes have fallen into place and I'm seeing how the whole line is going away, yeah, I feel a bit vindicated and happier. And yeah, to all those people who, doubted me and thus decided to say ignore my emails or just not respond, well, I'll wait for something even bigger, which also should be out there to tell you so. But that's coming. I am now sure of that. Oh, and the Adam Kadyrov thing, yeah, that's going to be mentioned in the next episode. But yeah, I hope that you had a good time. And more importantly, I hope that you two, as listeners of the show, And you're all my comrades, as you know. And again, if you visit Riga, Latvia, you'll be able to just hang out with me because I take everyone on tours. I try to be nice in this case. So it's important for me is so that everyone who's visited me, they know for sure that I'm like this in real life as well. Many people can tell you this at this point if you don't believe me. I don't focus on some sort of parasocial relationships. I really want to think of all you as friends of mine, whom I maybe can do something useful for. Which is why I also have my Discord and everything, and you have really been there for me all these years, and I really feel that, if we would meet on the street and you would recognize me, I would definitely, chat with you a bit, because I think that it's important to be decent and important to be yourself. But, sometimes my attitude towards where all of this is going is lost, since, well, a lot of analysts in the West tend to make mistakes about our region, and I feel doubted, and then, as I'm learning how to drive, one of the biggest standard mistakes is that I'm driving strictly according to the speed limit, but everyone else is just, passing me by, so I think that maybe this is not a 30 zone, maybe I should be driving 50 there, and then the instructor yells at me and asks, what the hell am I doing? Sometimes you need verification that what you're doing is the right thing and that the other people are making mistakes. And I guess this is our moment of this, isn't it? But if you're going to a workplace or education or somewhere in your friend's circle, maybe there's someone who has to choose about Russia, like there's in mine. And I'm really sad that Daryl Cooper doesn't really, want to talk to me anymore. I hope that changes, but I really wonder what people like him will say when this breaks out of the Vatnik segment, which I was surprised to find out that I'm one of the very few that actually follows. But when this breaks out in the mainstream, oh boy, this is going to be a storm. And of course, New York Times and places like that will plaster it all over everywhere, and well, they will, of course, never mention my humble little work over here, but you will know. And that's all that matters, since, like I always say, happiness is mandatory. And today, comrades, well, I suppose today we get an extra potato, a mental one, just for good measure. До свидания, товарищи.